Hi, everyone. Dr. Tim and Hillary for another Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. We are back from Reefapalooza. It was lots of fun in New Jersey. How you doing, Hillary?
Doing good. Finally got caught up from being at Reefapalooza. So,
Wow, you caught up fast. I'm still buried from the Reefapalooza and Aquashellas of last year. And then reptile show in Southern California the weekend after 4th of July.
oh,
Yep. And
you
then
gonna adopt somebody?
no. I have
We need a
plenty.
mascot.
Well, how about we get a costume and you can dress up as the Dr. Tim's mascot?
I'm never gonna live that down, am I?
Nope, not at all. We have pictures, folks. She was in the parade.
I dressed up as a cowfish for the parade at Reefapalooza, New York.
Behind the octopus, the sea star, the Dory, and others. Yep.
Oh yeah, it was a fun time.
See, if you're not there, folks, you're not having fun with the parade.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there's plenty more. There's Southern California, Reefapalooza, and then later on in Texas. Today, we are going to switch gears a little bit. I don't think we've talked about ponds in any of the podcasts, have we?
I really don't think so. We might have touched on like the koi line, but we haven't gone into depth on ponds.
No pun intended, folks.
You're the one usually making the jokes there. I
Yeah,
didn't even try.
There you go. So we're going to talk about ponds and pond maintenance. I have 3 ponds in my backyard. The koi had babies last summer or spring, summer, and now they're of a nice size and they're basically aquatic pigs. They just eat and eat and eat and they're growing like crazy. But what I want to talk about is if you're thinking about a pond or you have a pond, how do you maintain it? And the real secret in maintaining or not spending a ton of time maintaining a pond is in the design. So we'll talk about design first and then go into how often you should maintain things and make it so that a pond isn't work, but it's enjoyable. With my travel schedule and stuff, I don't like to spend a lot of time maintaining the pond. So it was built by me and my son years and years and years. It's been up for 20 plus years and pretty much works automatically. Don't have to do that much to it. So what's the secret? First is if you're thinking about a pond in Southern California here, because basically we have constant earthquakes, and I think in most places, unless you are doing a very formal pond, so maybe I should start there. A formal pond is if you have a very geometrical, lots of granite, lots of brick, where it's just going to be almost like a swimming pool, very much fit into a man-made design. Yeah, my pond is very natural. I have a decent backyard, but then I have slope that goes up the back. And so it was just obvious, and there's oak trees and fir trees. So it was pretty obvious that I just wanted to have a pond that you would come into, you'd be walking, taking, it's a mental journey. Of course, it's my backyard, but you're taking this walk in the woods and you come upon a pond amongst the trees with a waterfall coming down the hillside. And that's the look. So it's very natural. People might say it's a little overgrown, but that's the idea. You want to explore, find it as you're on a walk, versus a almost a Hollywood or French manor that has a very rectangular concrete pond, no trees, no plants, everything is completely groomed, nothing's out of place. And there's nothing wrong with that style pond. It depends on what you like and your backyard and your landscaping. What you choose in that respect will determine, one, how much maintenance you do. Because if you have a pond, one, that is exposed to constant sunlight, the chances are quite high that you're going to have lots of algae if you don't take care to design some algae combating things into the design. And I don't mean UV. My pond, I don't use UV, obviously don't use ozone. I have a big sponge filter and that's it. I run the water through up the hill, down the waterfall into a wetland. So I use natural filtration, basically plants, to remove any of the nitrogen, and then into the pond where I have water lilies planted in flower pots with stones in those so the koi can't dig out the water. But that may not go if you have a very geometrical pond out in the sunlight. And then you might have to use UV, but again, just like in our saltwater aquariums, UV only kills things that are waterborne because the water passes through the UV. It's not going to do anything for what grows on the sides of the pond. And if your pond is out in the middle of, with no cover, just direct sunlight, in the summertime, 12 hours a day, you're probably going to get lots of algae in there. That's the first thing you have to decide is, okay, how am I going to do this? I'm in the back now. The trees are grown in. Water lilies, plants. They all remove the nitrogen and the phosphorus. It's the same in all these aquatic environments. You're going to feed your fish. You're going to have nitrates. You're going to have phosphates. Something's going to use that. How you battle algae is design into the pond, not getting algae in the first case. And knock on wood, I've never had an algae problem because I have plants. Think about what you can do to grow plants in your pond. And as I mentioned, if you have this very formal pond, consider water lilies maybe aren't the best plant to have to soak up nutrients because they don't grow that big. They are really nice, they're beautiful, and they have nice big leaves to help shade, because that's the other thing. Koi don't do well if they're out in the pond being in clear water exposed to direct sunlight. That's going to stress them. So you have to provide shading places, which water lilies do great. But back to getting rid of nitrates and phosphates, you can consider almost plant boxes, some areas in the pond where you can grow some types of grasses or aquatic, what are called macrophytes that grow quick, and you harvest those. What's that remind you of? An algae scrubber. So the plants are consuming the nitrates and phosphates. You're pruning the plants. That spurs the growth of the plants even more to get rid of the nitrate and phosphate so that you don't grow algae. There's landscape companies, aquatic landscape companies that can advise you. Nurseries have aquatic plants. Think about that. You're just not going to have a swimming pool. Most people want to turn, or make a swimming pool into a koi pond, but you can't put chlorine in the koi pond because that's going to kill everything. So you've got to look at more natural ways of doing that and realize that UVs, which some people want to put massive UVs on ponds, are probably going to cause you more problems than anything they're going to solve. I'm not a big fan of UVs. And the issue with most UVs, whether it's on your pond or whether it's in your tank, is that they have to be maintained. The lamps have to be changed. The quartz tube has to be cleaned, and there's a flow rate. Just because you're flowing water through the UV doesn't actually mean it's doing anything, because it has to have an exposure. It has to expose that cell to so much UV at a different rate. So depending on what you're trying to kill, what microorganism, algae, or what you're trying to kill, you have to expose some of them to huge amounts of UV, and most of the units that are available really don't do that. And it's just another thing to maintain. So not really a big fan of UV on a pond or on a fish aquarium, really. The other thing is because we're talking about designing so that you don't have to do a lot of maintenance. And I see this all the time. I was just talking to a guy at Reefa Palooza this weekend, and was talking about, yeah, we're having a pond come in, and we're going to put a pond in, and the company, they wanted to put a bunch of rocks on the bottom. No, don't do that, folks. Use a liner and make it smooth and have a center drain. And oh, it leaks. Well, I've had my pond up for years and years and years. Did it right, a center drain. What's that do? The fish are swimming around in a smooth bottom. Okay, slope it a little bit to the center. Put the center drain in the center, not on an edge, right in the center. Most ponds, what will happen, of course, is just the swimming activity of the fish, the waterfall, the water current will keep the detritus, the organic material, suspended so that it goes into the drain. I've never cleaned the bottom of my pond. Once in a while in the fall, when the leaves are falling, I'll get in there because it's clogging up the filter, which I'll get to in a minute. So I go in with a net gently. I never wear shoes. I'm always barefooted in the pond. So that I don't know if I'm stepping on something, because you get sticks and different things in there that can puncture your liner. So you have to be careful with that. But this maintenance thing that I read about and people tell me about, where they cover the pond bottom with rocks, that's just a way to sell you a service. Okay. The nitrifying bacteria are going to live other places. The rocks are basically to clog up and trap detritus so that you'll pay for a service company to come in and remove all those rocks to clean the pond bottom. It's ridiculous. Put a center drain in it and then have a filter box. There's different companies that make them that drains to with a foam, or what do they call it? Matilla filter screen. Do you know what I'm talking about, Hillary?
I am not familiar with those.
It's, I think I got it right. Matala, and it's different. It's kind of a hard plastic, and they have different size openings. So you have a large size opening that you go first, that the water flows through in your filter box, and that captures, leaves and things like that. And then there's a finer one that will trap detritus. And it gets, like any mechanical filter, it gets clogged up and it can be completely clogged. So you clean that out once in a while. But that keeps the pond water clean. It keeps the bottom water clean. And there's just one place that you have to do any maintenance, and that's in the filter box. And the next thing you want to make sure you have is a water skimmer. So the filter box comes with a flapper that you build it into the side of the pond so that you're draining from the top and you're draining from the bottom. And there's a little holder you can close. There's like an accordion door on the overflow, and you can close it. Look, when I'm feeding, I close it so the food doesn't come into the filter box, and you're just draining from the bottom. And it's an easy way to keep the surface clean. Why you want to keep the surface clean? Because that's where the oxygen exchange is, and it looks better. And then you're also draining from the bottom, catching the big stuff. And what's the maintenance that you do? In the most maintenance I do is once a month in the summer, and maybe once every 2 months, in what winter we have in Southern California, is I remove those filter screens and hose them off. I have 2 sets. So I remove the dirty ones, I have a shop vac, drain the water in the filter box, clean it out, because you're going to have detritus in there and stuff like that. Put the new ones in and open up the valves, and you're done. And the whole maintenance of my pond probably takes me less than 15 minutes. And I've never, oh yeah, you change out the box, have the filters ready. It takes a little longer to clean the screens, but you get a power washer and you hose off the screens. So it's just not that maintenance intensive if done right. I don't ever get in there and I don't have some type of vacuum that cleans the bottom. The bottom's not dirty. Like I said, sometimes you get big leaves, um, and you get in there with that, and that's it. There's no UV to change. There's one area, two filter pads, boom, done. It's um, not, and it's all in the design. If you're finding that your pond, one, let's troubleshoot a little bit. You have lots of green water. You're growing algae. That's kind of the number one thing is, why is my pond so green? Do you have competitors? You know, we talk about this all the time with marine aquariums, where unintentionally you're removing the bacteria from the water column that consume the nitrates and phosphates. In a pond, we really need some primary producers like algae, plants, something like that. So if you're getting that green water, one, can you shade your plant at all in maybe, or your pond, and maybe you can't do it with trees? Okay, can you make a decorative shade cloth, some type of cover, so that the pond isn't in direct sunlight all day long? You've got shade cloth that's different percentages of lets different percentages of light through, just to give it some shade. That's one way, cut down on the sunlight. Can you take some of that water and run it through some type of temporary planter, a decorative box that you've got lots of plants in? What are the plants doing? Again, removing the nitrates and phosphates. You've got to find some type of competition to get rid of that algae. If you put the UV on, okay, maybe you can have clean water. You're going to grow attached algae, and that's even worse, because that just can clog everything. Your pump, I mean, it just grows, a stringy aquatic mess. And so think of some biological ways that you can run it. One of my other two ponds, which are smaller, I have one pond where I have all plants. That's the higher pond. And then from there, the water runs through a stream that I made. And from that stream, then it runs into a pond which just has right now turtles. There's no plants in there because the turtles eat everything. But it just has turtles, and they have a basking spot, a little raft they can get out on. But you've got to think more natural in order to reduce the maintenance. You can ignore everything I'm saying. You're just going to have lots of work put in it, and the pond's going to become a chore instead of something that's enjoyable.
I was just thinking the same thing. I think can kind of be said for aquariums. You talk to people about freshwater versus saltwater aquariums, and they're like, oh no, I would never do saltwater. It's way too hard. And I'm like, I don't know. Like, once you get it up and established and running, and it's really not that bad if you set it up in the right way.
Right. And you're willing to limit yourself. You can't have limited numbers of fish and put in lots of food and things like that. But an established reef tank, or saltwater aquarium, can be pretty maintenance free, but it's all in the setup. It's thinking about it.
Yep.
Going down to your local big box hardware store and buying what amounts to a children's pool and digging a small hole, that's 18 or 12 inches deep, and filling that with water, that's called a bird feeder where I live. You got egrets, herons, an animal feeder, because we got raccoons, we have possums, and no, I don't live out in the boonies. I live on the edge of the boonies, but you're just going to have all these animals, and in the shallow water, you're just feeding it, all those animals, and that's not what the koi are for. So my pond is 4 feet deep, straight walled, and I use risers with made out of cinder block. And then I put my plant pots on those at different depths depending on the plants. But that way, knock on wood, I've never lost a fish to birds or raccoons or animals because it's a deeper pond. And it's, I'm not talking 5, 6, 7 feet. And that's another thing you've got to look if you're thinking about building a pond is what is your local restrictions? Because if you get over a certain depth, then it's considered basically a swimming pool. If you get over a certain depth, you have to take measures to make sure that kids, it's called an attractive nuisance, so that kids can't get in there. Maybe you've got to have a fenced yard, a locked gate, something like that. So, always check your local ordinances for, what the rules are. Um, but it really starts out with design. Poor design in your pond just means lots and lots of maintenance. Yeah, that's why with the one pond I have, which is more formal, that's where the turtles are. There's no plants in there, but the water recirculates basically through submerged zone of all sorts of plants to take out all those nutrients. Plants are definitely your friend when it comes to ponds. But okay, Tim, I live in, the Northeast, upper Midwest. We have snow and stuff like that. Sure, we can have plants, but what should we be doing? So what maintenance should you do on a regular basis? So say you're up and your pond is, iced or, it's cold and covered with snow. Once the temperature starts to drop below 60 degrees Fahrenheit, the water temperature, koi don't eat much. And when your water temperature is below 50, just stop feeding. The koi can overwinter. They'll do fine without having to be fed all the time. As long as you fed them during the summer and kind of fatten them up, they're not using much energy because they're not really doing much. And they are a, cold water organism. Uh,
Isn't this, can't you say the same thing for like pretty much anywhere? Don't they just go through seasonal fluctuations?
Yeah, but my water never gets my pond water probably bottoms out at about 60. But I definitely reduce the feeding. I in the wintertime, I don't feed every day. I don't feed 2 times a day, just a small amount. Over winter, you've got plants and debris that might be clogging up in there. It does get a little bit much if you don't get rid of the leaves. So I have oak trees and other uh, trees um, over the pond or my neighbor, and the leaves fall into the pond. So before it gets too cold, I do make sure those are out. Like I say, I've got my center drain, but I get in there and I can get them with a small net and get them out of there and start the winter with a clean pond as much as you can. Feed lightly. And now, as spring is coming and the water's starting to warm up, once again, get in your pond if you can, or a net in your pond, and make sure that you're removing as much of the organic material as you can. Because as the water warms up, you're going to get a bacterial bloom where you can't, where the bacteria start to decay all this stuff, and you don't really want that because the bacteria can consume lots of oxygen. So I make sure the pond is pretty much organic debris free as you're entering spring. Because the other thing that can happen is as the bacteria are breaking down those organics, what are they doing? They're converting those organics into ammonia, which causes nitrate. Ammonia is nitrified to nitrate. And then you've got phosphate from the food, algae bloom. That's the fuel for algae, whether it's attached or single-celled algae. So remove it. Try to remove as much of that material as you can before the water warms up too much. Clean out your filter pads. Then it's just like it is your mechanical filter, just like on an aquarium. Don't worry about biological filtration at this point. Clean those filter pads regularly to get rid of that organic material before it can all be broken down into ammonia, causing nitrates, which can promote algae growth. Because that's what everybody hates. That's the biggest thing. I had a pond, it was just a mess. I couldn't get rid of the algae. It was green or stringy algae, all this. And that's because you're not controlling nutrients. And that's really what maintenance is about, is controlling nutrients so that you don't get the algae, which causes issues. Now, that doesn't mean I don't like a little bit of organic in the water. And in fact, my pond water is not crystal clear. It's tea color. And that's because it has tannins from the organic material in it. And tannins help retard bacterial growth. So again, knock on wood, I've never lost a fish to a bacterial infection. Now, I don't know if that's because of the water I keep, but I know some people want this, just like in aquariums, crystal clear, just so blue and clear water, because that's clean. Well, that's clean to our eyes, but what fish lives in that? That's not where fish live. And by adding UV and all these other devices pond companies try to sell you, once again, you're making the water too clean. And that's, I really firmly believe, leads to bacterial problems with your fish, especially when it's so clear in the summer and the sun's beating down on it and your fish are stressed.
I really hadn't thought of that before, like clarity of the water and having the tannins in it and stuff. That's interesting.
Yeah, and tannins are definitely they've been shown they retard bacterial growth. Oh, what about the nitrifiers? Well, hopefully, like everything else, you're not super crowding the pond. If you've got a ton of fish in there and you're feeding a lot, what I'm talking about is probably not going to work. I'm talking about having a balance. Where the idea is to have an enjoyable pond, have nice fish population, but not overdo it, because the more fish, the more food, you're just going to have to put maintenance into it. And it's not where I want to spend my time. But definitely crystal clear water with all this filtration is just like a reef aquarium. And I preach this too much. You're keeping the water too clean. And that's just a recipe for disaster on your fish. So if you've got a pond and you have continual fish disease problems, look at your water, not so much your water quality, but just your water. Is your water this crystal clear, super clean? You've got all these things to remove, quote, all this bad stuff. Maybe consider removing some of that and going with a little bit more natural. And this can be done even in the formal ponds. I'm not saying the formal pond needs to be brown colored water, but does it really need to be crystal clear water? Years and years ago, I worked on a pond for a big Las Vegas celebrity. They had flamingos. The flamingos kept on coming down. Yeah, kept on coming down with botulism. Figured out they had an automatic feeding station where the birds could hit it and get food, but they would way overfeed themselves such that there was huge piles of uneaten food in the water. And that was the reservoir for the botulism. Yeah, it was interesting.
Are you going to share what celebrity?
No. Most issues where people want me to help with their pond is algae. And long-term, less energy, less cost. It's all in, as I've been saying for 45 minutes, it's all in the design. And you don't necessarily have to rip out your pond. Just have to think of what you can do to basically add something in there that consume the nutrients and then easily trap and remove the organics. That's why I really don't like where people, oh yeah, the pond company put all these rocks on the bottom. Oh, I hate that. Or no center drain. Rocks on the bottom, no center drain, and no overflow. That's a recipe for disaster right there. Not for the service company. They're going to make lots of money till you get fed up with it and just fill it in.
As someone who has been a service technician and taken care of ponds before, I got to say they were probably some of my least favorite days.
So let's talk about that. You service ponds. So what was the big issue?
It's just there was a lot of overfeeding and not enough space, and the people would never call for maintenance until it was too late, and then they would want us to come out and like fix all of these things and have this magical solution. And then they would get irritated that we were out there for a good part of the day trying to do water changes and stuff and, you know, take care of things. And
So, and that's the issue. And did you do a lot of ponds that had rocks on the bottom and no center drains?
I don't think any of them had center drains. One of them had rocks, but most of the other ones did not.
The center drains are they're such a time saver, especially, a real nice pond. You can have a waterfall, and that's what I have is if you can picture this, I have the pond, I have a pump that pumps up the hillside, and then it's a horseshoe shape. The waterfall goes in two different directions. And as it comes down the hillside, it goes to a little pool. It's only maybe not even 5 inches deep. And in that pool, I have plants and pots where I can be growing plants. And that pool also calms the water, and that allows organic material to settle. So what I can do is I can turn that pump off, or I can redirect with the three-way valve, the water to stop going down the waterfall. And I've got another discharge on the other part of the pond. And I can take a shop vac, which I do maybe twice a year. And I can first, with a submersible pump that pool down pretty low. And then I can take a shop vac and I can suck all the muck out of that right there.
Oh,
Because
that's smart.
and then from there it goes to another waterfall and another little pool, and then runs into the pond. But you just design areas where you're going to get organics. Where can you trap that to keep things clean? And because there's no fish up there, the water can be still, and I slow the waterfall down for a second to drop out the organics using the flowers in the flower pots, which is the first place where I have the nitrates and the phosphates consumed. Then it goes down a nice little straight waterfall that's like 4 feet tall. And I think I've posted pictures in the night videos. I got night lights on there. Compliments of Lifeguard has real nice pond lights that you can control and do different colors and things like that. Shout out to our friends at Lifeguard. And then into the main pond. But the whole deal is, if you don't have to dig another pond to have the plants. You can have plant boxes and different types of plants, or there are certain floating plants that you can put in the pond. What you can use is take a thicker rope and stretch that across a part of the pond, and that will trap the plants in one section. And you can have a clear area, and you can have a planted picture the plants floating on the water. And during the stay in the summertime, your fish are going to be under those plants. They're going to be in the shade. But if you use certain types of aquatic plants, you can just pluck those out and throw them away, because they're going to divide and grow. And you've got to export that nitrates and phosphates. One thing I don't recommend is duckweed. Yeah.
Pass.
And so if you're at a nursery and you're buying aquatic plants and you see duckweed, I would have a tray, something as far away from your pond as you can, and I would rinse those aquatic plants really well, because once you get duckweed, you're going to be stuck with it. At least, I mean, maybe in the winter it'll die, but out here in California, you'll be stuck with it.
I feel like people keep that in their freshwater tanks too.
They do. And I was just reading an article. There is a company out in San Diego, and they're growing duckweed and to produce human protein. And I guess um, the duckweed, because it grows so fast. I mean, duckweed divides in front of your eyes. You start with a couple of plants, and by the afternoon, the surface of your pond is just covered with this stuff, and it's everywhere, and it sticks to everything, and it's just a mess. Um, but they're looking at a way to grow this, and then they extract this human protein from it. It's quite a complicated process, and some people are saying you'll never make it, enough, but they're trying. So I don't recommend duckweed. Also, look at your local, again, regulations about what plants you can and can't have, because some of these aquatic plants can be nuisances, and never ever throw anything away into any type of body of water. None of that stuff, folks. Keep it to
No,
yourselves. Okay.
absolutely not.
Don't release your fish. Don't release your plants. Don't do any of that. Even if you think it's just the drainage ditch next
No.
to your house. No.
Take it back to the store that you bought it at.
Yeah. Or if you don't want it, throw it away. I've covered some basics here. Do you have any questions, Hillary?
I don't have any specific questions, but I want to touch on our line of koi and pond products, because we haven't really talked about that. So I think that's important to chat about.
We do make bacteria, the waste away bacteria for koi ponds. You're filling up your koi pond. This is a good time to use the aqua cleanse, to get rid of ammonia, more chlorine and chloramines from your water, because like my one pond is over 5,000 gallons. So you can use First Defense, but it's more cost effective to use the aqua cleanse to get the chlorine, chloramine out of the water, assuming you're using city water. First Defense is great for your koi, acclimating them. Waste away, you can definitely add that on a regular basis to help clean things. If you've got hard to reach places, if you've got algae growing on your waterfall and stuff like that, periodically adding some waste away will help with that. But again, as we always recommend, the first time you use it, go small, a quarter dose. I have a generator and air stone. So if, during fire season, when the electric company turns the electricity off for 3 days, I can be aerating the pond. Don't freak out. The fish can do well, as we've talked about. I know we did a session on preparing for emergencies for aquariums, the same thing. Reduce the feeding, keep the organics down, and the koi can do fine for several days they can go a long time without feeding, actually. We don't really make a koi food. I don't mix turtles with the koi. Turtles, it's tough to have any nice plants in it. To me, I've never had that success of keeping nice plants in a tank, in a pond with turtles. Those guys they're ferocious. I must be doing something right, because like I said, I've had spawns. Every couple of years I get a nice group of koi, and I look for homes, because I don't want to overcrowd my pond, because I don't want to do a lot of maintenance. It's for enjoyment, not for more work.
Yes. Although, I know people, I've got some friends who enjoy the maintenance side of keeping fish. I'm just not one of those people.
So if you're listening to this, please, if you have questions, you've got a pond, you're thinking of a pond, it's part of that aquatic, fish keeping. I enjoy it. I like in the middle of summer, I don't mind getting into the pond with the fish, yes, of course, and pruning the lilies and some of the plants and things like that, and it's nice and cool back there. But if you have questions, want to learn more, definitely info at Dr. Tim's or through all the social media. We can do more podcast about building and maintaining ponds.
Yeah, sounds good. And hopefully maybe you can take some photos of your pond and some of the stuff that we talked about, and we can include them in the video. So if you are watching this on YouTube, you can have some visuals.
Oh, I can do that. I can definitely send you some photos. I even have photos when we were building it. So you see how we did
Ooh.
that.
How long did it take to build it? It sounds pretty massive.
Well, yeah, but it was kind of fun, the digging the hole and the building the waterfall wasn't so much, but the interesting part was getting the massive rocks, and they're not like the size of a house, but these were big. Getting them to the very back of the house. And we literally did what they said, the Egyptians did. Um, those tree stakes, the round tree stakes that they put around trees when they freshly planted them.
Oh yeah.
We cut those to like 3 feet long, a bunch of them. And the truck dumped the rocks in my front yard on the grass without breaking my driveway, luckily. And then I had some friends over, promised beer and barbecue for the help. And we had a path of these round stakes, tree stakes, and we'd get the rocks up on the stakes, which are like 2-inch diameter or 3-inch diameter. And we had a rope tied to it and a couple of people pulling from the front and a couple of people pushing from the back. And we just, on these rollers, push these rocks to the edge of the pond.
Oh my goodness. I hope there's photos of this.
There has to be photos of it somewhere, but it was, yeah.
Sounds like a massive undertaking.
Oh, it was, and like I said, these are heavy. Their rocks are, they're not even how to describe, maybe the size of a 55-gallon trash can or something. But out here in California, you're limited, sandstone or granite, and I didn't want any of that. And I found this nursery that had, the rocks are purple. I'll show you some. I'll get some pictures for you.
Ooh.
And they're gorgeous. And yeah, and then I have from that same nursery, or a nursery in rock quarry, I have a large flat rock that is the bridge, and that I didn't want a wooden bridge. I wanted a rock bridge because I don't want to have to paint and seal wood or anything over water. So it's a flat rock that serves as the bridge as you walk around the pond.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'll get some pictures for you, Hillary, of the different things. But it took, because it was just me and my son and friends, it took a whole summer to really build this. But it wasn't it was, a labor of love and stuff like that. It was just trying to have fun doing it.
I know how that goes.
Yep. Secret though is deep center drains and water overflow.
All right. The takeaway.
Yep. And energy efficient pumps. I don't, because electricity can cost a lot of money. All right, everyone. This has been Dr. Tim and Hillary for another session of the Dr. Tim's Aquatics podcast. We hope you enjoyed this. And if you have questions on ponds, aquariums, saltwater, freshwater, anything aquatic, we'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much, and good fish keeping.